I'm Phoebe, 34, a software engineer from Seattle with a life that changed overnight. One moment I was helping my family despite their flaws. The next, my sister was screaming, "Get out!" while my father nodded in agreement. Their betrayal cut deep, but fate had other plans. Today, I live in my grandmother's $20 million mountain estate, finding peace I never knew was possible. Before I share my story, tell me where you're watching from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of survivors and thrivers. Growing up in Seattle, I always felt like the odd one out in my family. My mother passed away when I was only 7, leaving me in the care of my grandmother Margaret, while my father Thomas struggled with his grief. My sister Amanda, 2 years older, quickly became the apple of my father's eye. Perfect grades, perfect looks, perfect everything. "You'll never be as put together as your sister," my father would say, not unkindly, just matter-of-factly. Those words stung, but I found comfort in my grandmother's unwavering support. "You have a different kind of brilliance, Phoebe," grandmother would tell me. "One day the world will see it." I threw myself into computers and coding, finding a world where logic made sense, even when family dynamics didn't. By the time I graduated with my computer science degree, I had already developed several promising applications. I landed a job at TechFront, one of the biggest tech companies in Seattle. My life settled into a predictable rhythm. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment with my boyfriend James, whom I'd been dating since college. James worked in marketing at a different tech company, and while we weren't passionate, we were comfortable. At least that's what I told myself. Despite my good salary, I was always financially stretched. Between helping my father with his medical bills and paying off my own student loans, I rarely had much left over. James and I split expenses, but he often complained about my family obligations. "Your father has Amanda to help him too, you know," he would say. "You don't have to shoulder everything alone." But Amanda, despite her successful career as a pharmaceutical sales representative, always had reasons why she couldn't contribute more. Her downtown condo luxury car payments and expensive wardrobe apparently left her with little to spare for family needs. Every Sunday, we gathered at my father's house for dinner, a tradition that felt more like an obligation than a joy. Amanda would dominate the conversation with stories of her achievements and social connections, while my father beamed with pride. My contributions to the conversation were often met with polite interest at best. "So you're still at the same company?" Amanda asked during one particularly uncomfortable dinner. "Don't you want to advance your career?" What they didn't know was that I had been working on something revolutionary. For the past year, I had been developing a new algorithm that could transform data processing speeds. My team at work was impressed, but I kept most of the details private, working on refinements in my spare time. Grandmother was the only one who truly encouraged my ambitions. Even as her health began to decline, and she moved into the Pinecrest Assisted Living Facility, she always wanted to hear about my latest projects. "Never let anyone dim your light, Phoebe," she told me during one visit, her hand trembling slightly as she patted mine. "You have more strength than you know." At work, my algorithm was gaining attention. My manager started bringing executives to my modest cubicle for demonstrations. Suddenly, I was being invited to meetings I'd never been included in before. James noticed the change too. "You're always working late now," he complained. "And when you're home, you're distracted." "This could be big for us," I explained. "If this algorithm works the way I think it will, it could mean a promotion, maybe even a significant bonus." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That would be great, babe. We could finally take that vacation to Europe I've been talking about." I didn't tell him that any extra money would likely go toward my father's mounting medical bills, or perhaps a better facility for grandmother. James had never really understood my family obligations, seeing them as burdens rather than responsibilities. As my professional stock rose, I noticed subtle changes in how Amanda treated me. Her competitive nature, always simmering beneath the surface, became more pronounced. When I mentioned a possible promotion during Sunday dinner, she quickly changed the subject to a luxury condo she was considering buying. "Dad, you should see the view. It's absolutely stunning," she gushed. "Of course it's quite exclusive. Not everyone can afford to live there." The look she gave me spoke volumes. In her world, success was measured by outward displays of wealth and status. My work, no matter how innovative, didn't register on her scale of achievement. Little did I know that everything was about to change. The comfortable, if imperfect life I had built was balanced on a foundation that was about to crumble beneath my feet. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of a presentation when my phone lit up with the Pinecrest Assisted Living Facility's number. My heart dropped. "Ms. Marshall, I'm afraid your grandmother has passed away." It was peaceful in her sleep. The world seemed to stop. Grandmother Margaret, my rock, my champion, was gone. I stumbled through the rest of the day in a fog, making necessary calls and arrangements while trying to process my grief. The funeral was held 3 days later. The Seattle rain provided an appropriate backdrop for my sorrow. Amanda arrived in a designer black dress that seemed more appropriate for a cocktail party than a funeral, while my father stood stoic and dry-eyed beside her. "She lived a good long life," he said, as if that should mitigate our loss. 86 is nothing to sneeze at. James stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders, in what should have been a comforting gesture, but somehow felt performative. I noticed he kept checking his watch. After the service, a man I didn't recognize approached me. "Ms. Marshall, I'm Lawrence Whitman, your grandmother's attorney. She asked that I speak with you after the service. Would tomorrow morning work for you?" I nodded, curious and confused. Grandmother had never mentioned an attorney. The next morning, I arrived at Mr. Whitman's downtown office. To my surprise, my father and Amanda were already there, sitting stiffly in leather chairs across from Mr. Whitman's imposing desk. "Ah, Ms. Marshall, please come in," Mr. Whitman said, gesturing to the remaining chair. "Now that everyone is here, we can begin." He opened a folder and cleared his throat. "I'll get right to the point. Margaret Marshall has left the bulk of her estate to her granddaughter Phoebe Marshall." "What estate?" my father interrupted. "Mother lived in an assisted living facility. She sold her house years ago." Mr. Whitman's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Marshall, your mother's financial situation was more substantial than she led you to believe." He turned to me. "Ms. Marshall, your grandmother has left you her property in the Cascade Mountains, including the main residence, 2 guest houses, and approximately 200 acres of land. The current market value is estimated at $20 million. I gasped. Amanda's head snapped toward me, her eyes widening. "There must be some mistake," my father said, his voice rising. "My mother didn't own mountain property." "I assure you there's no mistake," Mr. Whitman replied. "Mrs. Marshall purchased the property 30 years ago and has maintained it since then." "But why wouldn't she tell us?" Amanda demanded. Mr. Whitman glanced down at his notes. "Mrs. Marshall was quite specific about her wishes. She believed this property would be safest in Phoebe's hands." The drive home was silent tension thick in the air. My father had barely spoken to me after the meeting, while Amanda had plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Congratulations, sis," she had said, her voice tight. "Grandma always did favor you." James reacted differently when I told him the news that evening. His initial shock quickly gave way to excitement. $20 million, babe, do you know what this means? We're set for life." He pulled me into a hug that felt more possessive than loving. "When can we see it?" "I'm not sure," I said, still processing everything. "Mr. Whitman said he'd arrange for me to visit the property next week." James immediately started making plans, talking about renovations and parties, despite never having seen the place. I noticed he used "we" and "our" when discussing the inheritance, though we weren't married or even engaged. The following week, Mr. Whitman drove me to the property. As we wound up mountain roads leaving Seattle's urban sprawl behind, he handed me an envelope. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this once we were on the way to the property." Inside was a letter written in grandmother's familiar, elegant handwriting. "My dearest Phoebe, if you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever comes next. Don't grieve too long. I've had a wonderful life, especially the parts where I got to watch you grow into the remarkable woman you are. The property you're about to see has been my secret sanctuary for decades. I never told the family about it because, frankly, they wouldn't have understood. Your father always saw money as something to spend, and Amanda learned that lesson all too well. You, though, you see value differently. You understand that true wealth isn't about showing off or acquiring status symbols. It's about security, freedom, and the ability to live life on your own terms. That's why I'm leaving this place to you. It's not just land and buildings, it's possibility. It's a fresh start should you ever need one. Trust your instincts, Phoebe. They're better than you think. All my love, grandmother. Tears streamed down my face as we pulled up to the property. What came into view took my breath away. Nestled among towering pines was a stunning timber and stone main house with panoramic windows overlooking the mountains. Two smaller guest houses flanked it on either side, equally impressive in their rustic elegance. Your grandmother came here every month, Mr. Whitman explained as he showed me around. She kept a small staff to maintain the property, a groundskeeper and a housekeeper who live in town. The main house was warm and inviting with soaring ceilings, a massive stone fireplace, and furniture that managed to be both luxurious and comfortable. My grandmother's touch was evident in every room, from the wall of books in the library to the state-of-the-art kitchen where I knew she must have baked her famous blackberry pies. Why wouldn't she tell anyone about this place? I wondered aloud. Mr. Whitman's expression was knowing. Your grandmother was a very private person, Ms. Marshall, and perhaps she understood that some things are best revealed at the right moment. As I stood on the deck overlooking a pristine alpine lake, I felt an unexpected sense of belonging. This place unknown to me until today somehow felt like home. In the weeks following my discovery of the mountain estate, the initial shock from my family gave way to something more calculated. What had begun as surprise quickly evolved into a coordinated effort to influence my decisions about the property. Amanda was the first to change tactics. 3 days after my visit to the estate, she invited me to lunch at an expensive downtown restaurant, somewhere we'd never gone together before. "I've been thinking about Grandma's property," she said delicately, cutting into her salad. "It's a lot for one person to manage. Have you thought about what you're going to do with it?" "I'm still figuring things out," I replied cautiously. "Well," she smiled, "you know I've always had an eye for design. I could help you modernize the place, make it truly spectacular." What went unsaid but hung in the air was her assumption that she would be spending significant time there, perhaps even living there. By dessert, she had moved from subtle hints to direct questions about which guest house she could fix up for weekend stays. My father took a different approach. He called me the following Sunday, voice gruff with emotion I'd rarely heard from him. "Your grandmother should have thought about the whole family," he said. "I was her son after all. 30 years she had that place without telling me." "I'm sorry, Dad. I had no idea either." "Well, what's done is done," he sighed. "But family should stick together, Phoebe. That property is part of the Marshall legacy. It should benefit all of us." By benefit, I soon discovered he meant financial relief for his growing debt problems. A week later, during our usual Sunday dinner, he casually mentioned his medical bills and how a small portion of the property value could solve all his problems. "It's what your grandmother would want," he insisted, while Amanda nodded vigorously. Even more surprising was the change in James. After 5 years together, our relationship had settled into comfortable predictability. We rarely discussed marriage. Yet suddenly he was leaving bridal magazines around our apartment and taking me past jewelry stores. "I've been thinking," he said one night over dinner, "maybe it's time we made things official." The timing wasn't lost on me. James, who had always been ambivalent about commitment, was now eager to secure his place in my life, and by extension, my newfound wealth. At work, things were changing too. Word of my inheritance had somehow leaked, though I'd told only my immediate supervisor about needing time off to deal with my grandmother's estate. Suddenly, colleagues who had barely acknowledged me were stopping by my desk to chat. My algorithm project, which had been gaining momentum, was now being steered in directions I hadn't intended by senior management. "We need to discuss the ownership parameters of your work," my department had informed me during a tense meeting. "Given the company's investment in your development, we believe exclusive rights would be appropriate." Translation: they wanted full control of my innovation with minimal compensation to me. Before the inheritance, I might have reluctantly agreed, needing the job security. Now I felt a strange new confidence in pushing back. Meanwhile, the pressure from my family continued to mount. Amanda began showing up at my apartment unannounced, once bringing along two men she introduced as family friends, interested in outdoor properties. It took only a few minutes of conversation to realize they were actually developers looking to assess the potential for subdividing the mountain property for luxury cabins. When I confronted Amanda, she brushed off my concerns. Don't be naive, Phoebe. That land is worth more broken up than is one massive estate that nobody uses. Later that evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a bank representative asking about my intentions regarding your father's outstanding loans. Confused, I pressed for details and discovered my father had somehow implied to his creditors that his financial situation was about to improve dramatically due to a family windfall. The final shock came when I overheard James on the phone while he thought I was in the shower. She hasn't decided what to do with it yet. No, she's still all emotional about her grandmother. Don't worry, I'm working on it. Once we're married, it'll be easier to persuade her. Yeah, I got photos of most of the documents. I stood frozen in the hallway, water dripping from my hair, as the full realization of his betrayal washed over me. The man I'd shared my life with for 5 years was conspiring behind my back, photographing private documents, discussing me as if I were merely an obstacle to wealth. That night, I lay awake beside James, listening to his even breathing and feeling like I was sleeping next to a stranger. For the first time, I truly understood why my grandmother had kept her mountain sanctuary secret. People change when money enters the picture, or perhaps their true selves are simply revealed. The next morning, I called Mr. Whitman. Is there anything else my grandmother left for me? Any other messages or instructions? There was a pause on the line. She did leave a secured box with instructions that you should receive it when the vultures begin to circle. Those were her exact words. I wasn't sure what she meant, but I think I know exactly what she meant, I replied. Can I come pick it up today? The pressure from all sides continued to intensify. At work, executives were now making veiled threats about my employment if I didn't sign over exclusive rights to my algorithm. At home, James was alternating between romantic overtures and probing questions about the mountain property. And every day brought new calls from my father or Amanda, with increasingly desperate schemes for accessing my inheritance. The tension was taking a physical toll. I began suffering from insomnia and anxiety attacks, sometimes finding it hard to breathe when my phone rang with a family member's number. The safe haven of my apartment no longer felt secure, especially after I discovered James had been going through my files when I wasn't home. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon when I decided to surprise Amanda by dropping off a birthday gift at her house. As I approached her front door, I could hear raised voices from inside. Curious, I moved toward an open window. She's being completely unreasonable. My father's voice carried clearly. That property should have been split between the girls at the very least. The will is pretty solid according to what James found. A voice I didn't recognize replied. Our best angle might be questioning her mental competence to manage such valuable assets. I froze, unable to believe what I was hearing. James says she's been having anxiety attacks, Amanda added. That could work in our favor. We just need documentation from a doctor. And James is on board, the unknown voice asked. Completely, my father confirmed. He stands to benefit significantly once they're married. He's already laid the groundwork by suggesting she's been unstable since Margaret died. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. The gift bag I was holding dropped to the ground with a soft thud. Taking a deep breath, I picked up the bag and marched to the front door, ringing the bell with more force than necessary. The voices inside immediately hushed. Amanda opened the door, surprise quickly replaced by a forced smile. Phoebe? What a nice surprise! I pushed past her into the living room where my father sat with a man in an expensive suit, and another man who was taking notes. James was there too, looking like he'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Don't let me interrupt your meeting about having me declared mentally incompetent, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage and hurt boiling inside me. The room fell silent. James stood up, reaching toward me. Phoebe, it's not what you think. Really? Because I think you're all plotting to contest my grandmother's will by claiming I'm unstable. Now, Phoebe, my father began in his patronizing tone, we're just concerned about you. The stress of managing such a large estate. Save it. I cut him off. I heard everything. The property, the plans, James's role in all this. I turned to face my boyfriend of 5 years, the man I had supported through job changes and family crises, the man who had been secretly betraying me. How long have you been spying for them? James at least had the decency to look ashamed. It's not like that. We're just trying to protect you from making mistakes. The only mistake I made was trusting any of you, I replied, my voice breaking slightly. Amanda stepped forward, her expression hardening. You're being ridiculous. Grandma obviously wasn't thinking clearly when she made that will. Why else would she leave everything to you and nothing to the rest of us? We're just trying to correct an obvious mistake. The mistake was mine thinking any of you actually cared about me rather than what you could get from me, I said, backing toward the door. I'm leaving and I'm going to pretend this conversation never happened. But if any of you pursue this plan to have me declared incompetent, I will fight you with everything I have. Amanda's face contorted with rage. You always thought you were so special, didn't you, Grandma's favorite? The smart one, the special one. Well, guess what? You're nothing special. Just a naive little girl who got lucky. Amanda, my father cautioned, but she was too far gone. Get out! She screamed, pointing at the door. Get out of my house and take your holier-than-thou attitude with you. I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something to defend me against Amanda's outburst. Instead, he simply nodded in agreement with my sister. Dad, I whispered a final plea. I think it's best if you leave Phoebe, he said quietly. You're clearly upset. We can discuss this when you're thinking more rationally. In that moment, I saw clearly what my grandmother must have seen years ago. These people, my family, would never be satisfied. No amount of money would fill the void in them, and no amount of love or loyalty from me would ever be enough to make them choose me over potential wealth. James stood up, moving toward me. I'll take you home, babe. You're too upset to drive. I stepped back from his outstretched hand. Don't ever call me that again. We're done. As I turned to leave, Amanda rushed to the door and flung it open. And don't come crawling back when you realize you can't handle this on your own. I walked to my car with as much dignity as I could muster, though my legs felt like they might give way beneath me. As I put my key in the ignition, I noticed the birthday gift still sitting on the passenger seat. A framed photo of Amanda and me as children, arms around each other, smiling without a care in the world. I drove aimlessly for hours, tears blurring my vision, my mind replaying the scene over and over. The betrayal cut deep, not just because of their scheming, but because they genuinely believed I was incapable of handling my inheritance without their guidance. Years of subtle undermining had culminated in this, a family united not by love for each other, but by resentment toward me. It was past midnight when I finally checked into a hotel, unable to face returning to the apartment I shared with James. Sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, I remembered the box Mr. Whitman had given me earlier that week, the one my grandmother had left for when the vultures begin to circle. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was another letter and a small key. My darling Phoebe, if you're reading this, then what I feared has come to pass. The family has shown its true colors. I know this pain all too well, for I experienced it myself when my own fortune began to grow. Your father has always had expensive tastes, but little financial sense. Amanda learned from him too well, valuing appearances over substance. I tried for years to guide them toward better choices, but some lessons can only be learned the hard way. The key enclosed opens a safe in the library at the Mountain House behind the portrait of Mount Rainier. Inside, you'll find documents detailing the full extent of your inheritance, including investments and accounts I never included in the official will. I kept these separate to protect them from potential challenges. Now, I have one last piece of advice from someone who has walked this difficult path before you. You owe them nothing. Not your guilt, not your wealth, not even your forgiveness. Family should lift you up, not tear you down for their own gain. The mountain was my sanctuary when I needed to escape the endless demands and manipulations. Let it be yours now. There is peace in solitude, strength in standing alone, and freedom in releasing those who would drain your spirit. You are stronger than you know, smarter than they give you credit for, and deserving of every good thing that comes your way. With all my love, Grandmother. As I read her words written with such foresight and understanding, something shifted within me. The crushing weight of betrayal was still there, but alongside it grew a quiet determination. If my grandmother could rebuild her life on her own terms, so could I. That night, in a generic hotel room with the sounds of the city muffled beyond the window, I made a decision that would change the course of my life forever. I woke before sunrise, a plan already forming in my mind. My first call was to Mr. Whitman, who answered despite the early hour. "I need your help," I said without preamble. "I'm ready to take full control of my inheritance, but I'm concerned about potential legal challenges." "Your grandmother anticipated this," he replied. "I've already prepared several contingencies." My next step was to secure my digital life. As a software engineer, I understood the importance of protecting my account's emails and documents. I changed all my passwords, enabled two-factor authentication, and backed up important files to secure cloud storage that only I could access. Then I made a call that took more courage than I expected, to Marissa Chen, a brilliant attorney I'd met at a tech conference years ago, who specialized in inheritance disputes. "It sounds like you need immediate action," she said after I explained my situation. "Family challenges to wills often begin with attempts to gain physical access to properties or documents. We should secure everything immediately." By noon, I had initiated legal proceedings for restraining orders against James and my family, citing the conversation I'd overheard and their explicit plans to have me declared incompetent. Marissa arranged for a security company to change the locks at the mountain estate and install a comprehensive monitoring system. "What about your personal belongings at your apartment?" she asked. "I'll need to get those today while James is at work." With Marissa accompanying me as a witness, I returned to my apartment and quickly packed essential items: clothes, personal documents, irreplaceable mementos, and my work laptop. I left a brief note for James. "I know everything. Don't contact me. Any communication should go through my attorney." I included Marissa's business card. As we loaded my car, my phone buzzed with texts from both Amanda and my father, likely alerted by neighbors about my packing activity. I silenced the notifications without reading them. "They're going to try to paint you as irrational," Marissa warned as we drove away. "Every action you take needs to be documented and completely above board." "I understand," I replied, feeling strangely calm. My grandmother's second letter mentioned additional assets in a safe at the mountain house. We should secure those documents next. The drive to the mountain property took several hours, giving me time to process the seismic shifts in my life. By the time we wound up the private road leading to the estate, the security team Marissa had arranged was already in place, installing new locks and a state-of-the-art alarm system. Inside, I went straight to the library. Behind the painting of Mount Rainier, just as my grandmother had described, was a wall safe. The key from her box fit perfectly, revealing folders of documents, jewelry, and several external hard drives. The documents confirmed what my grandmother had hinted at. Her wealth extended far beyond the mountain property. There were investment accounts, technology patents, and minority stakes in several successful companies, including, surprisingly, a 5% ownership in TechFront, my employer. One folder contained detailed records of my father's financial history: loans my grandmother had given him that were never repaid, failed business ventures she had bailed him out of, even gambling debts she had covered to protect the family name. The pattern stretched back decades, painting a clear picture of financial irresponsibility that no amount of money would likely solve. Another folder held years of correspondence between my grandmother and various family members, including multiple letters from Amanda requesting financial assistance for increasingly extravagant purchases. The most recent was dated just 3 weeks before my grandmother's death, a request for $50,000 to purchase a luxury car. "Your grandmother was meticulous," Marissa observed, reviewing the documents. "This will be invaluable if your family contests the will." The external hard drives contained more surprises. My grandmother, despite her age, had been surprisingly tech-savvy. One drive held complete backups of her financial records, while another contained what appeared to be research on various technology investments she had made over the years. But the most shocking discovery was on the third drive, a folder labeled Algorithm Research. Inside were articles, patents, and notes about data processing systems, remarkably similar to what I had been developing. My grandmother had been following my field, understanding my work far better than I had ever realized. A text file simply titled "For Phoebe" explained everything. "I've watched your career with such pride. Your algorithm work is revolutionary," perhaps even more than you realize. Check the patent applications I've drafted. If you decide to pursue this independently, these will protect your innovation. I believe in your vision, even if TechFront doesn't see it yet. She had prepared patent applications based on publicly available information about my research, ready for me to review, revise, and file. She had seen the value in my work even before my own company fully recognized it. Armed with this knowledge, I made another crucial call to TechFront's legal department. I'm calling to inform you that I filed for independent patents related to my algorithm work, I stated calmly. While I've used company resources for the basic development, the core innovations were created on my personal time using my own equipment. There was a long pause on the other end. Ms. Marshall, this is highly irregular. Your employment contract clearly states, I'm aware of what my contract states, I interrupted. I'm also aware that my grandmother was a 5% stakeholder in TechFront, a position I've now inherited. I'd like to schedule a meeting with the board to discuss a potential licensing agreement that would benefit both parties. The mention of my newly acquired stake in the company changed the tenor of the conversation immediately. Suddenly, I wasn't just an employee they could bully. I was a shareholder with potential influence. By evening, I had established the groundwork for my independence. The mountain estate was secure. My most important belongings were with me, and legal protections were in place against the most immediate threats. As night fell, I stood on the deck overlooking the lake, watching the last light fade from the sky. For the first time since my grandmother's death, I felt her presence strongly, not as a ghost or supernatural force, but as a guiding wisdom that had anticipated this moment and prepared me for it. My phone had been buzzing all day with calls and messages from James, Amanda, and my father. I finally turned it on to check if there was anything truly urgent. James, babe, what's going on? Come home so we can talk about this. Amanda, you're making a huge mistake. Dad is furious. Father, your behavior is proving our point about your stability. Call me immediately. The last message was from a number I didn't recognize. This is Dr. Landry. Your sister Amanda suggested I reach out regarding your recent emotional difficulties. So they were already moving forward with their plan to have me declared incompetent. The evidence of their scheming should have hurt, but instead, it only strengthened my resolve. I turned off my phone and went inside to the warmth of the house that was now truly mine. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, but for tonight, I allowed myself to begin imagining a future where I was defined not by my family's limitations, but by my grandmother's example of strength and independence. The crisp mountain air greeted me at dawn as I stepped onto the deck with a cup of steaming coffee. For the first time in days, I had slept deeply and without nightmares. There was something healing about the mountain estate, perhaps the distance from Seattle's chaos, or maybe my grandmother's energy still permeating the space. My phone, which I had turned back on, reluctantly showed 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages. Scanning through them quickly revealed escalating anger, and threats from my family contrasted with increasingly saccharine appeals from James. The most concerning was a voicemail from my father. Phoebe, I've spoken with our family doctor. He's concerned about your erratic behavior, running away, making financial decisions in a state of grief. These aren't the actions of someone thinking clearly. We're trying to help you before you do something you'll regret. I forwarded the message to Marissa, who called back immediately. Classic intimidation tactics, she observed. They're trying to establish a pattern of concerning behavior they can present to a judge. How are you feeling? Surprisingly clear, I replied honestly. Clearer than I've felt in years, actually. Good, document that. Journal entries, voice recordings. Anything that shows your state of mind is sound and your decisions are rational. And following her advice, I began recording daily video logs calmly explaining my decisions and plans. I also scheduled a session with a therapist Marissa recommended both for my genuine mental health and to establish independent verification of my competence. Meanwhile, I focused on practical matters. The mountain estate needed attention after months with minimal staff. I met with Miguel, the groundskeeper, and Elaine, the housekeeper, who had both been hired by my grandmother years ago. She talked about you all the time. Elaine told me, eyes misty. Said you were the only one who understood what really mattered. Did my father or sister ever visit her here? I asked. Miguel shook his head. In 15 years, never once. She invited them many times in the beginning. always excuses. This revelation both saddened and validated me. My grandmother had tried to share her sanctuary with the family, but they had been too caught up in their urban social climbing to appreciate it. With the property's immediate needs addressed, I turned my attention to my professional future. Using the patent applications my grandmother had prepared, I worked with a specialist to finalize protection for my algorithm innovations. The meeting with TechFront's board went better than expected. My dual position as both an innovative employee and a shareholder gave me unusual leverage. We negotiated a compromise. I would license certain applications of my algorithm to TechFront while retaining rights to develop others independently. "You drive a hard bargain, Ms. Marshall," the CEO commented after the agreements were signed. "Your grandmother would be proud." The mention of my grandmother no longer brought the sharp pain of loss, but rather a warm sense of connection and continuity. I was following in her footsteps in ways I hadn't anticipated. Back at the mountain estate, I began exploring my grandmother's extensive records more thoroughly. Her journey from a middle-class background to substantial wealth was documented in journals spanning decades. She had started with small investments in the 1970s, gradually developing an uncanny knack for identifying emerging technologies with growth potential. "Always look where others aren't looking," she had written. "By the time everyone recognizes a good opportunity, it's already too expensive to enter." Following this philosophy, she had made early investments in personal computing, mobile technology, and later data services. The mountain property itself had been purchased when land in the area was considered too remote to be valuable. Now it was among the most desirable private estates in the Pacific Northwest. As I absorbed these lessons, legal pressure from my family continued. Amanda filed the threatened competency hearing, submitting statements from family friends, claiming I had been unstable and erratic since my grandmother's death. My father provided medical records showing I had been prescribed anxiety medication years ago during a particularly stressful project at work. James went public with his side of the story, portraying himself as a concerned boyfriend, blindsided by my sudden personality change and paranoid accusations. He gave an interview to a local news blog, describing how I had abandoned our life together without warning after coming into money. Each attack required careful, measured responses from Marissa and me. We submitted my therapist's current assessment, daily video logs, and documentation of the conspiracy I had overheard. The competency challenge was dismissed by the judge, who noted dryly that grief inheritance and family disputes often go hand in hand. But there is no evidence Ms. Marshall is anything but competent to manage her affairs. This legal victory seemed to further enrage Amanda, who escalated to leaving threatening voicemails and driving by the mountain property gates. We strengthened security and filed for a formal restraining order, which was granted based on her increasingly erratic behavior. My father, perhaps seeing the futility of the legal approach, switched to emotional manipulation. He was hospitalized for chest pains and made sure I was informed, though tests showed no serious issues. When I sent flowers but didn't visit, he left a message saying, "I guess money really does change people. Your grandmother would be ashamed." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. My grandmother's journals had detailed similar manipulation attempts when she refused to fund his failing business ventures. She had written, "Thomas believes family obligation only flows in one direction, toward him. He has never understood that respect must be earned, not demanded." Throughout these challenges, I found unexpected support. Former colleagues reached out with job offers and partnership proposals. Neighbors near the mountain property who had known and respected my grandmother welcomed me warmly. Even some of my father's more distant relatives contacted me privately, sharing stories of similar treatment when they didn't comply with his financial requests. 6 months after that fateful day when my sister screamed, "Get out!" and my father nodded in agreement, I found myself transformed. The shy, accommodating software engineer who had spent years trying to earn her family's approval was gone. In her place was a woman who understood her own worth, set clear boundaries, and no longer feared standing alone. I established my own technology consulting firm, specializing in data processing solutions based on my algorithm. The business grew rapidly, attracting clients who appreciated both the innovative technology and my straightforward approach. The mountain estate evolved from a private sanctuary to a place of creative collaboration. I began hosting retreats for women in technology, offering both the physical space and mentorship to those navigating the male dominated tech world. In a final twist of fate, my father's gambling debts finally caught up with him, forcing him to declare bankruptcy. Amanda's social circle, largely built on the appearance of wealth and family connections, began to disintegrate as rumors of the failed competency challenge spread. James attempted to reconnect multiple times, his messages growing increasingly desperate as he realized what he had lost. I responded to none of it, neither gloating over their difficulties nor offering the financial bailout they still seemed to expect. Instead, I focused on building the life my grandmother had envisioned for me, one defined by genuine accomplishment, rather than appearances, by creation, rather than consumption. 1 year to the day after moving into my mountain estate, I stood on the same deck where I had first felt a sense of belonging. The morning sun painted the mountains gold and the lake below mirrored the cloudless sky. In that moment of perfect stillness, I finally understood the full measure of my grandmother's gift. It wasn't just the property, valuable as it was. It wasn't the investments or the financial security. It was the opportunity to discover who I truly was when stripped of the need for approval from those who would never truly give it. It was the freedom to define success on my own terms, rather than chasing validation from people whose values were fundamentally different from mine. My tech consultancy had flourished beyond my expectations with clients, now including 2 Fortune 500 companies. The patent portfolio based on my algorithm had expanded to include applications in healthcare data processing, environmental monitoring, and financial technology. The mountain estate had become not just my home, but the headquarters for the Margaret Marshall Foundation, which I'd established to support women in STEM fields. The first cohort of scholarship recipients would be arriving next month for a summer coding intensive in the converted guest houses. I maintained no contact with my father or Amanda. Through mutual connections, I occasionally heard updates. My father living in a modest apartment provided by Amanda, who had been forced to downsize significantly after her luxury lifestyle caught up with her. James had moved to Portland and started a new relationship, though rumors suggested it was already showing strain. I felt no joy in their struggles, but neither did I feel responsible for them. The cord had been cut cleanly and completely that day when Amanda screamed for me to get out. Sometimes the most toxic bonds are the ones we're taught should be the strongest, and severing them, while painful, is ultimately healing. My own healing had come gradually. There were still nights when I dreamed of that confrontation, still moments when a familiar song or scent would trigger memories of Sunday family dinners or quiet conversations with James. But those moments no longer carried the sharp edge of betrayal they once had. I'd learned that family isn't defined by blood, but by actions, by who stands with you when standing beside you offers them nothing but your company. I'd built a new kind of family among friends, colleagues, and the community surrounding my mountain home. The most surprising discovery was how much I enjoyed my own company. The solitude that might once have terrified me now felt like a luxury. Time to think, create, and simply be without performing for others' approval. During my exploration of the estate, I discovered my grandmother's collection of journals dating back to her 30s. Reading them had been like having conversations with her across time. She too had faced betrayal by those who should have been most loyal. She too had rebuilt her life according to her own vision, rather than others' expectations. The most valuable freedom, she had written, is the freedom to walk away from those who cannot love you without conditions. It feels like falling at first, but then you realize it's actually flying. Her words had become my mantra during difficult moments. They reminded me that what looked like an ending, being thrown out of my sister's house, my father's silent agreement, the collapse of my relationship, had actually been a beginning. The mountain estate, once my refuge from a world that had rejected me, had become the launching pad for a life far richer than the one I'd lost. The peace I'd found wasn't just about absence of conflict, but presence of purpose, clear-eyed and self-directed. As I sipped my morning coffee watching the sun climb higher over the mountains, I thought about the journey of the past year. From devastation to determination, from isolation to independence, from rejection to rebirth. The path hadn't been easy. There had been legal battles, public scrutiny, and moments of deep doubt. But standing here now surveying not just the physical property, but the life I'd built, I knew with absolute certainty that I had emerged stronger than before. My grandmother's final gift had been perspective, the understanding that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. Being told to get out had forced me to go in, into my own strength, into my own potential, into the person I was always meant to become. I lifted my coffee mug in a silent toast to the mountains, to my grandmother's memory, and to the strange, painful, beautiful journey that had brought me home to myself. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic people even when they were family? What gave you the strength to make that difficult decision? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my journey resonated with you. Remember, sometimes the hardest goodbyes lead to the most beautiful new beginnings. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.